Okay. Pat, let's talk a little bit about New Year's. And I guess we have a lot of thoughts that go with New Year's. We have New Year's Eve parties, and people make resolutions. It's a time of new beginnings and so on. I saw a news report recently that said that more people were going to stay home this New Year's, that there was going to be less alcohol consumed, and that a high percentage of people, I think it was over around 52%, said in a survey that they intended to spend sort of a quiet evening at home on New Year's Eve. So there's all kind of thoughts connected with this day, important day in the calendar. So let's explore a little bit of that. Any part of that that strikes you?
Well, one part that strikes me is I'd like to find out after New Year's how many people in fact stayed home and had a quiet New Year's and drank less alcohol.
Well, you think that people go out at the last minute, or they just say that?
That's my hunch. Is sometimes that in the busyness of Christmas, a little bit of quiet time sounds very pleasant. But in fact, when we get to an occasion that has been so ritualized as celebrating New Year's Eve, I suspect that a lot of people who might have indicated that they would stay home will find it necessary to do the ritual and to bring the New Year in as it has been brought in. This is one of our cultural, I think, significant cultural events.
I know you could stay home and participate via television, and as they watch the large ball drop down in Times Square in New York and large crowds of people. There does seem to be two different kinds of things going on there. There's some
That's
people
right.
who want to be connected in that, and they want to be part of, be in a large crowd. You can see that in the people out in Times Square and people going to large parties and so on. There seems like there's another type of person who's more interested in doing that alone, maybe being more reflective, or spending a quiet time, or getting away from some of the hustle and bustle of the ordinary world.
I think one of the reasons, though, Jim, we come together is to do precisely what we at other times do, in fact, choose to do by ourselves, and that is we get together to comfort one another. I think when people cheer and cry and laugh at the stroke of midnight and turn to one another and hug their loved ones and embrace them, they're doing it because the year has been bittersweet. Some people are not there who were there the previous year. It takes courage to move ahead and into another year where we're going to become, of course, a year older. And so there's an ambivalence that touches our fears and our hopes both, and that we hold one another then as a way of comforting and giving courage to one another to face whatever the new year may bring. That's sort of a long-winded answer.
Well, but I think there's some important points in there, as near as I can figure. I mean, one is to look back over the past and to reflect on how it's gone. And when you do that, your word bittersweet probably describes the experience. It's certainly an ambivalent one, mixture of joys and sorrows and triumphs and failures. And I suppose a lot of it has to do with how we process that or think it through. I mean, obviously one way to do that in life is just to stay in the rat race all the time, just to be moving around in the eternal cycle and never stop it, never try to figure out what it's all about or to reflect on it. And there's a tendency in that. I mean, sometimes life is just too busy to ever stop the action and to see what we want to really make out of it. On the other hand, if we do, part of what seems to happen is that there's this sort of melancholic thing that takes us over, or this sense of that it hasn't gone as well as we would like it to go, or a sense of failure and so on. So I think we have to sort of factor that into the whole mix, and part of maybe what New Year's allows us to do is to reflect on that and to somehow integrate the darker side of the previous year, to think it over and figure out how we can redeem some of the failures and move beyond some of the things that have gone badly.
Yeah, I think there's an inevitable reflectiveness built into the realization that we are moving out of one year and into another, and in this case, out of one decade and into another. We will be writing 1990. I think it's difficult for a lot of us to adjust to that, and a part of the pain is in recognizing that we had made perhaps grandiose, unrealistic resolutions the previous year, and perhaps, no doubt have not lived up to them as we thought we might or as we wished we could the previous year. And so we face that reality of our personal fragility, our limitations, our failures, And at the same time, again, it is bittersweet, melancholy. At the same time, there's that element of hope that we get a chance to start again. We get a chance to perhaps reheat the old resolutions, put them in the microwave of our new intentions and enthusiasm, and it's that hope that forever lives within us and is the impulse that gives us the courage, I think, to step forward.
Also, I think when you look back over the previous year, that it would be helpful to keep in mind the good things as well. I mean, it would be easy to be carried away by the failures, and there does seem to be something built into human nature that moves us to remember things that have gone badly. I'm not sure exactly why that happens, but certainly a lot of people report that to me, that when they think back over or do an examination of conscience or reflect on previous period, that it's very often the failures, the mistakes, and the embarrassing moments that seem to jump into one's consciousness. And yet I would think it very valuable to make sure that we would bring in the other side of the picture, to try to consciously remind ourselves of progress made, of faults that have been overcome, of the virtues we've developed, as well as the vices that continue to plague us. In other words, it's almost to me like you have to make a conscious effort to keep some sort of balance in the picture, and the conscious effort has to be to bring forward the positive and to celebrate those good things. I mean, of course, in our Christian faith we say that's the triumph of grace that's been at work. So let's look for the signals that the Lord has been at work in our lives. I have a feeling that sometimes over long periods of time that it's easy to lose sight of progress. You almost have to stop and think, like, where was I a year ago? How was I managing that problem? Or where was that relationship at? Or how was I doing in my family circle? In order to realize when progress has been made. It's like when you live through it, you just accept the progress and very often get pulled down by the things that haven't gone well.
Yeah, I would agree with you there, Jim, and I suspect that a lot of people would give as their explanation for why we remember the failures and the negatives, perhaps a rather sweeping and I think unfair condemnation of institutional religion, which they would claim keys us into a sense of guilt about our sin and our failures to live up to the high ideals that religion puts before us always.
We'd have to grant something there, wouldn't we? Religion at times has
I would find it
done
interesting to see if people who grew up unchurched do not suffer the same sense of inadequacy and from the same lack of self-esteem as those who in fact were churched. I don't know. It'd be interesting, but I think we lay too heavy a burden on churches.
A point well made, and I'm thinking about some conversations had recently with unchurched types who did demonstrate some of those same symptoms in their own lives: a lack of self-esteem, a feeling of being a failure, etc. So, I mean, I'm perfectly willing to go along with that, and I think you're right. I mean, we can overplay that. I think that's a common thing to say, that institutional religion has caused those kind of problems, and maybe that is not an entirely fair thing to say. But beyond that, you were on a roll there on a different point, and if I can take you back to that, about it's built into human nature almost, it seems, to function in this way and to emphasize that negative side. It's not just a matter of institutional religion.
No, it isn't. And I suppose it has a lot to do with our innate idealism, with perhaps the fact that we see models before us, or we have heroes placed before us, or we have embraced heroes through reading, through meeting great people. And somehow we establish for ourselves, and I'm sure it's very important that we do, high goals. But as one wit once put it, our ambitions are sometimes too great for our wiring, and that this is one of the sources of all neuroses, that we establish perhaps unrealistic goals. And I would suggest that a part of the reason that we in America are most inclined to do that is because this is the country of infinite possibilities. Maybe not as much as it has been historically. But I know James Baldwin made the point that in Europe, what European countries need generally is a sense of life's possibilities, whereas we in America need a sense of life's limitations. And my hunch is that a part of the mythos that pervades our culture is the sense of the American dream, embodied in the idea that we can be anything we want to be. If we really will it and work toward it, we can do it. And the truth is, we can't.
That's right.
In a lot of cases. And that so there's a built-in frustration, and we're building in for ourselves, I think, repeated disappointments.
That's a point well made. The whole cultural expression says something like you ought to aim high and the sky is the limit, and
hitch your wagon to a star.
Yes, all of those sayings that are really embedded in our psyche now, and I think we do still carry it with us despite the failures of the past and things like Vietnam and Watergate and scandals and all of assassinations that continue to haunt us. There is deep down within us this high expectation, and that we really can make. There are psychologists, of course, that claim that's one of the causes of depression, that the expectations are too high, you can do anything you want, and then when you find out the limitations, that you just can't handle it. And so when we think back over the past year, it's easy to say, well, we might have aimed too high and then not feel happy with ourselves, essentially disappointed because we haven't made it. On the other hand, I thought you made a good point in suggesting that it is, again, built into human nature that we are the kind of people who find a gap between our ideals and our performance. And I think we don't want to get away from that. I mean, I think that's human, and as human, I think it's a graced kind of situation. We don't have to see that negatively. I mean, the sense that there's a gap between performance and ideals can be a great spur. It doesn't have to be a downer. You can say, well, let's use that as a springboard to move into the future, and let's use it as a way of trying to make some progress without getting bent out of shape if we don't make it entirely. So that gap is part of human existence and can be turned to advantage, it seems to me. The opposite is to lose all dreams, to fall into a state where I don't really care. I'm cynical about life. I never could get better. We can't make the world any better. It's just going to always be this murky mess here, and what are we going to do about it? So, and I think that, that's an opposite kind of problem that one really wouldn't want to have. I must say, in dealing with young people, I'm often happy when I see that sort of idealism in them. I mean, at least it gives you a shot at seeing how you could do better in life.
A couple of comments. As you were talking, I was thinking of a couple of lines from that old Catholic classic, Mr. Blue by Miles Connolly. One of the lines was, "Aspire not, and you shall not fail," which is a negative way of expressing an interesting thought. And the other is the idea that there are lots of people in cemeteries who never make mistakes, that we are by nature mistake makers. This is a part of what it means to be human. But as far as the idealism of young people goes, I find it interesting that in my own teaching, college teaching, we were exploring the concept of hero recently. And a number of my students said to me, I don't have heroes. I don't believe in heroes. Nobody's perfect. I'm going to carve my own way. I'm not going to imitate anybody else, which I found quite intriguing, and I was dumbfounded. And my first response was to look at them and to say with genuine sadness, I feel very bad for you that you do not have any heroes. And they all sort of looked at me blankly, but aware that I was deeply troubled by their statement. Then I got away and thought, why did that bother me so much, and is that so bad? Are they simply more realistic? Or conversely, is there a problem with a culture which does not present heroes to them, where all they've ever seen are the anti-heroes on television, in novels, certainly in the newspaper, where there's a strong debunking of any public figure who arrives at a certain status in an attempt to sort of bring them down to their humanity by demonstrating their Achilles heels.
Well, there might be a couple things that work in that whole analysis there. One is that ambivalence we find in the American culture now. I mean, the country was founded in great hope. This was to be the promised land, and where we would meet God and the Lord would come again, and you really could hitch your wagon to the star and move into a larger world, a westward movement. There was always hope and possibility. But we've had these great tragedies in our history in our own time, and our young people grow up with those in mind as well, and they often involve the great figures. I mean, we have politicians being assassinated, and then they read stories about people who have not lived the kind of lives privately that we thought in their public demeanor they demonstrated. We've had, our sports heroes have taken on a different color now because they make so much money, and there's tragedy involved in all of that, and disappointment. So maybe it's almost a way of what you're picking up in your class is that very ambivalence. I mean, what I would suggest that is in those young people there still would be an idealism. It's like, well, we'll make it though. I mean, I'll found a good family, and my kids will grow up right, and I will partake of the American dream. I'll get ahead, even though I don't have these heroes anymore. I would think you're seeing that ambivalence right within their own psyche and expressed to you.
I think you're right. And a few of the people did indicate that while they don't have heroes, they do have some role models. I thought that would be an interesting topic for an article, from hero to role model.
Yeah.
What are the differences in those two concepts?
Pat, I think we should look at the other side of the thing that you suggested early on, and that is that the New Year's celebration, which we're talking about here, is a time to look backward, and we see a mixture of good and bad, and there is a way in which the day calls us to be reflective, and maybe some people are into that, but it's also a time when we're thinking of the future, and the new year brings new possibilities. Some people sort of ritualize that by making resolutions. Other people think that's silly, and they don't want to be part of all of that, and they just disappoint themselves and so on. But I don't think it's really important whether we make formal resolutions or not, but there is something importantly human about being able to hope for a better future, of having some sense that there is possibility that lies in front of us, that there's doors opened. And of course, again, for us in a context of faith, we're saying there's a God who calls us by name and who will never let us rest, and who's always asking us to move forward and to try to improve ourselves, cooperate with His grace, and trying to make a better life for ourselves and for the world as a whole. So there is that hopeful side that I think we need to keep in mind. The new year opens up possibilities.
I'd just like to say a word about resolutions. I think they do demonstrate our belief in will, in our power to move beyond where we are, to exercise discipline within our lives. And there's something interesting in the fact that we like to publicize, many of us at least, like to let others know what it is we have resolved. And it seems to me that we want to tell others because perhaps implicitly we are asking them to call us to account if we don't shape up and if we in fact fail. And so we're saying, in some indirect way perhaps, I want to do this. I want you to know that I'm trying to do this. Will you help me?
I think that's absolutely correct. I think part of the psychology of it is to say it publicly. It gives it an objectivity.
That's right.
It puts it in front of others. I like the way you said it, that it sort of allows others to call us to account then. And maybe not that they do that formally. I mean, I would think that the psychology works whether the person ever said to you or not, well, did you keep your resolution? It's got a power just in saying it. It gives it a new kind of reality. I intend to make this progress in my life or to overcome this particular fault. I think it increases motivation is what it does. It's as now that I've made it public, I have a greater reason for actually trying to do it. And I suppose there is that sort of other self-interest that says, well, someone might ask me if I did it, or, this is liable to come up in conversation. That could be there, but I think it just has a power in its very making of it into an object, getting it outside of our own consciousness and in here into the external realm.
Reifying it. It's related certainly to the power that formulating our thoughts on any topic in a crystallized way always has on us. Sometimes I think we have a lot of disconnected fragments of thoughts about a given topic, and only when we are forced to express an opinion and have to somehow make choices among those various threads of thought and perhaps even diverging ideas, we come to discover for ourselves what in fact we think. And as we say that, even whether it's in writing or before an audience, and we say it verbally, say it out loud, we discover ourselves committing to that in a new way. I've noticed this happen in teaching religion, that as I make certain statements about what in fact I believe, I discover I believe them more in the making of the statement.
Yeah, our language certainly helps us along that line, helps to clarify, and I think we do learn by expression in that way. And so that someone is forced to look at their lives and says, well, I'm going to do less gossiping, or I'm going to be more honest with others and with myself, or I'm going to pray more, I'm going to read the Bible more, or I'm going to try to straighten out my relationships and be less resentful and less jealous and more open as I deal with people. I mean, you begin to clarify where you're really at. It's almost an examination of conscience built in to the very making of a resolution. One has to figure out where one has been off the track. And I think we do come to know ourselves better in the very statement. The linguistic analysts talk about performative language, language that almost brings behavior as a result, and maybe that's the way it actually functions, these resolutions. But as you know, I mean, there's a lot of people who just think it's a bunch of baloney. They don't want to fool with it, and they I think a lot of it is they don't want to disappoint themselves, or they think it's just trendy, or you're supposed to do it, and they're really against it. But what I'm saying is that I think it's built into the human condition that we do it. I mean, even if you aren't saying it out loud, and even if you're not doing it on New Year's, hopefully somewhere along the line we're all trying to figure out how we're going to respond to the call of God in a better fashion, how we're going to move forward, become more mature people and more adult Christians and so on. That's got to be part of who we are. And New Year's, as you suggest, is a time for ritualizing it, of bringing it to some sort of focus and doing it in a public way, perhaps. So the day obviously has a value along that line, it seems to me.
I'd just like to interject, since I've interjected a few things in this program, that probably it would be helpful, too, if we are sincere, and I suspect we always are when we make our resolutions, to think of a person that we can share the resolutions with, whether that person is with us on New Year's Eve or not, and that we can touch down with periodically. I suspect in some way this is related to the ancient Catholic ritual of confession, of having a spiritual friend. And this might be a spouse, it might not be a spouse, but someone with whom we can be very honest, and someone with whom we can share our progress or lack of it in trying to make these resolutions live in our lives and bring us to a new stage in our growth, in our spiritual growth.
I think that's a great idea. It also helps us deal with the problem that many people say, well, I can't find a spiritual director. I can't find somebody who's interested in talking about these matters with me. But as you put it, is sort of a spiritual friend. And if people don't like the word spiritual, it can be, anybody that we trust or can talk
That's
to
right.
at a deeper level. They become sort of a guide for us then. And by sharing a resolution or saying how we might want to improve, it seems to me we could multiply our efforts along this line. In other words, you wouldn't have to run around finding a spiritual director or making an appointment to see somebody once a week or once a month, but it becomes a much more informal process in a sense then. There's somebody around, a family member or lover or friend, that one is able to say, well, here's how I've been doing with this. I think that really is a valuable thing. It calls us to account. It also gives the other person a little bit of a chance to say, well, maybe you're not making it because of this. I mean, you said you were going to quit smoking, and maybe the reason you aren't quitting smoking is because you're not dealing with your down periods in a more constructive way. So you're using smoking as a way to get around all of that, or as an escape from it all. So a friend, even if they're not skilled professionally, could sort of know us and call us on that sort of thing, or maybe make suggestions about how we could do better.
You qualify you explain the word spiritual in case it would be a stumbling block for some people, but I'd like to suggest that probably every resolution we make at New Year's time is in fact related to our own spiritual journey, because it relates to a value that we feel we are inadequately living out, and that we want to grow in. And values are, of course, what the components of our own spirituality.
Yes. Well, I mean, I like the word spiritual. I think it is a rich word, and I think that there is always something deeper going on whenever we are serious, and the word spiritual helps us to point to that. And of course, it puts us again into a Christian context, a religious outlook here of saying that, well, it's really God who calls us into the future. It's God who opens up possibilities for us. And the reason we can trust the future or make resolutions is because we figure we're not doing it alone, not walking the journey by ourselves, that we believe God is at our side and God's always there with His help, and wherever there is sin and failure and limitation, God's grace and blessings always more abound. So there's a faith context to making resolutions. It said it's worthwhile doing because there's a God who's with me and is opening up a better future for me.
I think the very impulse to make a resolution should be seen as grace, as the way the Spirit speaks within us and calls us to take that step forward in our own growth, and to trust that that impulse is good and it is of the Spirit and deserves to be listened to.
Pat, I was thinking that really, even if you don't make resolutions on New Year's Eve or at the New Year's time, I mean, it's something that throughout the year we get our chance to do. I mean, it's not simply a one-evening thing, but that we are creatures who always have to be thinking of doing better and somehow, responding to the call of God. Well, Pat, I found the conversation to be interesting. New Year's Eve, resolutions, looking over the past. We look over the past and we see a mixture, bittersweet, as you suggested. The failures have to be integrated. We have to be able to get beyond them, not feel excessive guilt. Look at the past, have to be able to say, boy, thank you, Lord, for the progress we've made. And then the marvelous thing of looking into the future and seeing a future that's really bright with promise and has possibilities, and to do it in a context of faith where we believe that God walks along the path with us. I mean, if you want to see 27 minutes on the nose. 27.